if the fig tree lived, bore fruit, or if it was hacked down, but I hope it lived and lived to bear the fruit that God had intended. And how lovely to see all of our ministry partners represented in that song, I am going to live so God can use me. It's a great reminder of how to live our lives and the people that we are in ministry with. Happy spring. Is today the day or is it tomorrow? I always get mixed up, but we're close. It's today. Happy spring, my friends. Well, 1 year ago, not on this day, but tomorrow on March 21st, I purchased this orchid. And just say a prayer with me that this orchid stays intact on the pulpit, because it would be a tragedy if it fell off. I remember a time in worship here where I accidentally knocked something off on the pulpit that was sitting right about here. And from the choir, I heard, I'm not going to name who, some of you will remember, and that's why we can't have nice things anymore. So just, anyone have Velcro, duct tape? The good enough is held on with rubber bands. Maybe rubber bands would work. So I bought this orchid a year ago tomorrow, which is symbolic. I brought home this orchid to celebrate Angie's 10th anniversary of working at Providence in Southwest Washington. The move that brought us from King County to Pierce County. I thought it was a milestone worth celebrating. I don't know if I'll ever get to 10 years working anywhere. I'm 7.5 here. So 10 years, I think that is a great milestone. Although my brother David is a middle school teacher in the school district of Battleground, teaching in the suburbs of Battleground, Washington, in Amboy, and he has been there since the early 80s. I should get him an orchid or two. This orchid continued to flower for the rest of the year 2021, bringing color into the house as winter approached. I don't know when it stopped producing beautiful flowers, but at some point it did. After Christmas, we put our decorations away and hauled the Christmas tree. Well, Angie hauled the Christmas tree outside and sawed off its arms and put it in the yard waste. And sometimes when you put all the decorations away, you just want to make things neat and tidy and clean things up a bit and welcome what's coming next. And I looked at this orchid, and at that point, none of this was present. So you can imagine it was bare. And it looked dead to me. And I said in my out loud voice, sometimes it's better if I could just put a filter over my out loud voice. I suggested to Angie that perhaps it should be tossed out. I came home after church, I don't know, sometime on January 9th. I can count back to after Epiphany, but yard waste comes every 2 weeks. Tomorrow is a yard waste day, so I'm counting back to, it was January 9th. I'm almost positive, like 99% positive, it was January 9th. It was the baptism of Jesus Sunday, because that's how the liturgical calendar rolls. I noticed that the orchid plant was gone. It was not in the house. Angie said, I heard your bid. I heard your request, and I put it in yard waste. And then she said something like, but I did notice that it had one little bud. I felt bad about what I had done, what I had said, that perhaps it should cut it down, take it out. It's not worth inhabiting the space, the surface that it's sitting on. I went out to the yard waste and I thought, oh, I don't know how far down in the yard waste, but I was willing to go do some dumpster diving. So I lift up the lid, and thank God the Christmas tree took up the bulk of the space. And here is this poor orchid plant laying sideways on top of the Christmas tree, out with the old and the dead and all that has been losing needles and flowers. And I rescued it and I brought it back into the house, where Angie continued to care for it the past 2 months. And miracle, what do you see? It started to flower again, just as she ends 11 years working at Providence. I tell you, this orchid tells a story. It is a resurrection story, and it's full of rich symbolism, especially for us. I was ready to pitch the orchid because it was no longer flowering, just like in the parable that Jesus tells about the landowner growing frustrated with the fig tree that he has planted and orders the fig tree to be cut down, yanked out because it isn't bearing fruit. He is ready to uproot it and spare the soil from hosting its lazy roots. Despite the years invested in growing a fig tree, I understand it takes 3 to 5 years before a fig tree will ever produce any fruit. There is little patience for something so unproductive. The landowner doesn't see any benefit or beauty in having such a tree and wants to be done with it. The gardener comes along, and we have to remember that the gardener is a servant in this hierarchy. He boldly intervenes. He intercedes and defends the tree and requests just 1 more year. Give me 1 more year to nurture, cultivate, and care for the tree by breaking up the hard earth, aerating the ground around it so the roots can breathe and drink and take in nourishment. He'll put manure around it to provide life and fertility. Maybe we should call it Tegro. He believes there is still hope for this fruitless tree, but offers practical advice. If it bears fruit next year, well and good. But if not, then cut it down. So what is the purpose of a fig tree? Is the fig's only reason for existence to be eaten or monetized? Is it only useful if it provides fruit? And if it doesn't serve its purpose as we perceive it, does the fig tree deserve to be considered useless and thus cut down? Or can it nourish in other ways? Maybe the fig's existence is more complicated than just sustenance. I imagine biologists would have something to say about it. Those who work with trees, arborists, would have something to say about it. Perhaps our human existence is also more complicated than simply looking or being productive. We live in a world full of expectations of what it means to be productive. The landowner represents our culture's sense of how the world should work, and we internalize these expectations of ourselves. The fig tree wasn't productive enough, it was lazy, and therefore the dominant narrative, you are not worth the soil that you're planted in or the air you breathe. Lawyers have to have enough billable hours. Doctors now are limited to how long with the patient? 15 minutes? Maybe even shrinking. Amazon workers, faster, 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 limited bathroom breaks, or you're let go. It's all about efficiency and productivity and the bottom line. Oh, the shame of being unproductive. If you don't measure up, you're not worthy to be there. Get rid of it. Get rid of you. Make room for a more dedicated and hardworking fig tree. Who among us lives up to our fullest potential? And who defines what our fullest potential even is? The productivity experts can diagnose what's wrong with us and sell us the antidote in 3 amazing sessions for a super low price that is guaranteed to turn our lives around. What productivity expectations are you currently holding of yourselves, and what expectations are holding you captive? Kate Bowler, the author of the book we are using for our Lenten worship series and our study, talks about productivity in one of her podcasts. Our culture says that everything has to be for something. Reading is for self-improvement. Hobbies are for enrichment. Your child's soccer practice is an attempt to a better college application. Actually, everything your children do now is to present a better college application so you can be accepted. Didn't you know you're supposed to be getting better all the time? It's called hyper-instrumentalization. I've never even heard of this word before. Kate Bowler uses it in her podcast. The obsession with use. How useful was your day? When our lives get overwhelming, it's tempting to begin to use this logic as a weapon against ourselves. Look at us failing to multitask. We didn't get up early enough. We didn't check enough things off our to-do list. We failed to render all goods into ideas and practices and moments that can be useful. Therefore, we failed. Kate Bowler's podcast. And in God's economy, I don't believe that God sees that as failure. What the culture determines is not God's economy. I connect this obsession with productivity to the parable of the fig tree and to a story that Kate Bowler tells in her book, Good Enough. Listen to this story. So when she was a kid, her parents took her on a long hike through an Indiana forest. And there, she writes, I saw a spindly tree that had tumbled off of a cliff. The wind and rain had eroded the ground under its tangled roots, but the tree snapped at the base and tipped over into the chasm beneath. And yet the tree didn't die. It made a series of important choices. At first, the tree grew straight down, as if surrendering to gravity. There was nowhere else to go. But where it broke off from the base, the remnant began to thicken. It must have taken years, but its roots grew wider and deeper, and then, in a shocking act of hubris, the tree decided to try growing out sideways. It added a few branches that stuck out horizontally. More years passed. At some point, the tree decided that sunlight might be a good idea, and the only direction to go was up. I traced how the trunk made a perfect U shape and rather impertinently grew straight toward the sky. Can you imagine that in your mind's eye of what that must have been? Straight down and then horizontal and then suddenly creeping up. Perhaps you've seen in creation the resilience of such trees, trees that grow up in a crack, trees that grow straight down, but then they begin to curve. And Kate writes, perhaps you know what it's like to be pushed off the edge by some gust of wind. You suddenly know your precious lives are hanging on by so little. The human condition is all thin roots and rocky soil, and so you fall. When your life is snapped at the stem, there is almost nothing to do but watch yourself break. You find yourself trying to remember to breathe. Is this really my life? At this point, if you've never had anything devastating happen in your life, you can tune out to the rest of the story and come back in later. But I imagine that most of us have experienced grief or loss or some devastation. And this is our shared humanity. And so she writes, in the aftermath of devastation, the best we can do is survive. Try to sleep, remember to eat, remember to drink water. Keep breathing, nothing will feel possible, but there you are, and there you are again, and there you still are, another day. Even that may feel like a miracle. And then there comes a season when you think, but I could stay like this forever, overwhelmed, devastated, grieving, broken. Please hear me say to you, you are not ruined or broken or a failure. You are simply in pain, and God is with you. When life is hanging upside down, we must try to send all available energy to the roots. Drink a glass of water again. Utter the words, God help me. Try to get outside. Tell someone that you're struggling. Don't forget to sleep. It might not feel like much, but with these small acts of nurture and taking stock, you are like my favorite tree. You are letting yourself grow straight down because grief is a long story. Someday you might try to get your balance, stretching your branches out a little. See if you can reach and stay stable at the same time. There will be days when you will be able to look around and ask, what is here? Where is there some ground to stand on? Is there anything that tastes good now, that nourishes? Where is there room to grow? If so, you might be ready for a turn. There is no moving on. There is only moving forward. You are not finished yet. Not today. Lots of things in life can be medicine in our lives. Like this tree that found a way to heal itself, growing roots, seeking the sun. It was a long process. For the fig tree, healing took the form of accepting the care of the gardener who loosened the dirt around the tree, then added manure and nutrients. Sometimes what medicine looks like is pruning away the things that have gotten in the way. And Jesus tells parables and stories about pruning too. And I tell you, in my life, pruning has never felt good. Trimming away the bits, the pieces that maybe don't serve anymore, but it's necessary and useful. Sometimes medicine looks like laughter. Sometimes it looks like tears. Sometimes Medicine is doing something that doesn't have to have an end result, like play, just playing for play itself. You don't have to be productive all the time. It's not a Christian virtue. God called us to Sabbath rest. We are called to rest and heal. Luke doesn't tell us the end of the story, and maybe that's good. We can write the end of the story ourselves. He doesn't tell us what happens in a year. What happened to this orchid over the course of a year? Does the tree blossom? Does it bear fruit? Is it cut down? We don't know. Some of us have the posture of the landowner who had the tree planted. There's no more life here. Might as well throw it out, like I said to this poor orchid. All we can see is what others lack, not the abundance of life, hope, pain, and distress that they are currently experiencing. We see waste, not possibility. We see loss, not courage or resilience or persistence. Some of us feel like the fig tree, dismissed by others as fruitless, hopeless, lifeless, and not worth giving another chance. Some of us take the role of the gardener, nourishing, nurturing, caring, healing. Or we play all three different roles at different times in our lives. And this orchid, are you noticing now what direction the current flowers are growing? The stem is growing downward, where the previous life had flowers that were growing upward, but is still alive, but there's a curvature in the stem. And if you look closely, right here, Angie pointed this out to me this morning because I didn't see it. I did not have eyes to see it. Do you know what's happening right there? There's another bud. Ready to blossom. Sometimes we have buds ready to blossom too, but people don't notice necessarily. And so it takes a perceiving eye to notice when others are starting to get out of their comfort zone, outside themselves, but need a bit of nurturing and care. The gardener sees possibilities where others see impossibility. What we hear from the gardener is hopeful intervention. One more year, just one more year. And the great gardener, God, has chosen to bring us to blossom. We are waiting for the one who will cultivate us and nurture us into new life, into a flowering tree. I want to close with this poem called Camas Lilies by Lynn Unger. Consider the lilies of the field, the blue banks of Camas, opening into acres of sky along the road. Would the longing to lie down and be washed by that beauty abate if you knew their usefulness? How the natives ground their bulbs for flour, how the settlers' hogs uprooted them, grunting in gleeful oblivion as the flowers fell. And you, what of your rushed and useful life? Imagine setting it all down papers, plans, appointments, everything, leaving only a note. Gone to the field to be lovely. Just imagine yourselves going and wandering in a field, and the only intent and purpose is to be lovely. Can you see it for yourself? Maybe you have to imagine yourself as a child to get in that mindset. Gone to the fields to be lovely. Be back when I'm through with blooming. Even now, unneeded and uneaten, the camas lilies gaze out above the grass from their tender blue eyes. Even in sleep, your life will shine. Even in sleep, your life will shine. Make no mistake, of course, your work will always matter. Yet Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Amen. We have a hymn with a familiar tune.